John, celebrity makeup artist, and also creative director for L'Oreal Paris US. And I'm here with Dr. Afia today. And we're talking about, race and how to unpack trauma and just, how do you feel, how do you process, what do you do when you feel heavy anxiety around things that are chipping away at your psyche? So Dr. Afia is the author of two amazing books. The first was Strong Black Girls, and then the second is Texture. So, and she's a clinical psychologist, guys. So clinical psychologist. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Dr. Afia. She's going to tell us a little bit about herself, her books, and then we're going to unpack what we're talking about today. So Dr. Afia, hey, how are you?
How are you? Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday, my love. Yes, and this is the end of the close of Black History Month, so yes. And we're going to get some much needed rest after this, but I'm just happy you're here. I'm happy to hold space with you. I'm honored. I'm really, really honored. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, great. So I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm a hairstylist. Basically, I was able to marry my loves of beauty with mental health. And so I always loved doing people's hair. I would do hair in my dorm room in college or at family cookouts. But I remember talking to my aunt on the phone one day and telling her, should I pursue a career in hair or in psychology? And she said, well, why can't you do both? I don't know if she meant for me to do both at the same exact time, but that's how I interpreted it. And so I got a PhD in psychology, but then went back to hair school so that I could have more of an authentic engagement with women and people of color and really negotiate the stories that come up while people are getting their hair done in that intimate space.
It is very intimate. And it's when we talk about hair is it's such a direct correlation of how we see ourselves, but our crown we're emotionally attached to our hair, our skin, and things like that. There's a lot of trauma and there's a lot of healing that starts and stops in the head,
Yeah,
Can you tell me about your book Textures?
Yeah, so the book Textures is all about the history and art of Black hair, right? There is a science to Black hair. There's different techniques and strategies that can be used, but it also is just so beautiful, the intricacies of Black hairstyles that have happened throughout millennia are basically documented in the book. It's connected to a museum exhibit at Kent State University, where different artists have come together, and even like ancient, statues from Benin to recent posts on Instagram, really integrating the art around Black beauty and specifically Black hair.
Wow, that's amazing, babe. That's amazing. So, and then the first book was Strong Black Girls. Strong Black Girls is about what exactly?
It's about reclaiming Black girls' images in school. When we think about where some of the most traumatic experiences happen for Black girls, it usually is in educational environments, whether they're made fun of for their hair or skin color or facial features or silenced by teachers, that there's a lot of trauma there. And so just looking at how we can take back that space, because there are really some systematic experiences that most Black women had in school, and really investigate it and change it. It does not need to continue. So again, just thinking about beauty, for example, comes up a lot for Black girls at school.
And talking about navigating and what can continue and what we should actually leave behind. So when we look at after last summer, after George Floyd, after the protests, and we look at what happened at the Capitol riots, January 6th, there's so much trauma that we induce as Black people. I mean, in the workplace, microaggressions, not knowing if it's a safe environment to speak up if something doesn't feel right or feel unjust, if we're in a meeting or Zoom. And then we're always trying to figure out, I don't want to be the angry Black woman. I don't want to be the angry Black man, but I need to deal with this. I need to confront this. As a woman, you can speak up and say, hey, I don't feel safe. There's an unsafe environment, or they'll rally around you. They'll rally around you if you say, hey, actually someone followed me from my car, or can you walk me to my car in the parking lot? But when you insert Blackness, it becomes nuanced, and it's our imagination. So, and that in itself is trauma. That in itself, that gaslighting is anxiety, and we don't even know how to process it. I think that we're the first generation to lean into mental health in this way. From all of us, from Harlem to Hong Kong, we're the first generation to have an understanding of the mind in this way. But when you insert like what we're going through, it can be a really jarring experience, especially after like what happened in January 6th. I was like, wow, just seeing that alone, seeing that knowing that we live in the two Americas is something that chips away at our psyche, makes us feel less than whole. When we looked at what happened and the response, and knowing that if there was a different complexion or if you were Black, we would have been a completely different outcome. So question to you is, how do you navigate around triggers?
Wow. Okay, you just laid it all out there. There's this double consciousness, right? As Du Bois would talk about kind of what it is like to be Black, but to be in this system that is extremely oppressive. Because you were bringing up a lot of things about trauma. I just even want to define some of the terms, right? In terms of to make sure we're at the same starting point. But trauma is anything that is a deeply distressing experience. Something that sometimes you don't even need to experience yourself, but like you're saying, view and witness, that you can have vicarious trauma. Like for me, I've never been beat up by the police, but watching another Black person get beat up by the police, it almost feels like I went through that as well. And then to even think about microaggressions, then are these slight insults and invalidations that happen at a daily basis, because it's almost like getting killed by 1,000 cuts or even paper cuts, like these wounding experiences. And so it's almost hard to catch all of them because they happen all the time. So it just is making me think about, let's define it, because part of dealing with microaggressions is defining that it just happened. Because sometimes we might miss it, like, because it's a pause, like, what'd you just say?
Did you try it?
Yeah, and that's how it attacks us, because we're questioning, did racism or discrimination just happen, whether it's based on race, gender, sexual orientation, right? Did it just happen? Did they just say? And so that takes a lot of emotional energy, right, to question. But we need to know when it happens. That's actually a way to confront it, to say this was a microaggression or that was racist. And then follow up in terms of clarifying, like, did you mean to tell me that just because I'm Black, I got this job? Like, just to even kind of go into having them deal with it rather than we have to deal with it, just by being curious, like, what does that mean when you say blank? So to question it is actually one of the first recognizing and then questioning it is one of the first steps to dealing with it, because then it puts the energy, especially the stress and ownership, back on the perpetuator, like the person who enacted the violence, right? Because even thinking about the word microaggression, aggression is in there. It's like a violent act. And so to recognize you did it, I didn't do anything.
So, and the thing is, it's not for us to continue. Do you feel like we have to continue to teach, or do you feel like, listen, I come from this school of thought of, hey, listen, Toni Morrison's been talking, James Baldwin's been talking. There's been so much education happening, and so but it's easier to learn about racism than experiencing it. But I don't necessarily want to be the only one to have to check. It's tiring to have to check people about these things, and when it's like, oh man, that's weight, that's work, that's a lot of work, that's a lot of weight. And then you risk becoming the angry Black person at work, or whatever that looks like. And so what do you do with that? Are we tasked with making sure that we stop it when we see it? What's a great way to stop it? What's a safe way to actually go to HR or a boardroom or Zoom and say, hey, this is not okay? Like, what does that look like?
Okay, great question. I think that there are elements of prevention and intervention, right? So to even have a statement with the people that you work with, or in your work environment, that that this type of behavior is unacceptable. This is what it is. If you say or do this, this is racist. I think that there almost needs to be explicit conversations in advance of working in certain spaces, as a way that if it comes up, then we can identify it, right? I think that it's also important to recognize that there are consequences to treating people in a certain way, and to recognize that you can be reported, that there are claims that you can be fired or let go because of what you said to someone. I think that there has been a culture to really recognize, these people who are in positions of power are oftentimes perpetuating these very negative stereotypes, and to be able to hold people accountable.
Yes.
But it's hard. It's hard because oftentimes those people are in positions of power. How do you fight them, but maintaining the energy? And I think that it involves organizing, right? Which I think is beautiful about this experience in terms of the Black Beauty roster, having people come together and having a little army to some degree of other people that will stand up with you, right? So that you don't feel like you are alone in all this. So if we look at, the 1960s and 70s, people created so many different Black organizations to confront these systems of power that were oppressive. So I think the same thing has to happen now, and systematically to confront all the different instances that are happening often.
I have a question for the people who are, who are new to this conversation or who don't have to necessarily experience it firsthand. How would you define racial trauma?
Okay. All right. So we can say that is a deeply distressing experience related to race. I think that it is long lasting and anxiety provoking. I think that racial trauma and stress does not go away. I think it's intergenerational. I think our parents experienced it, our grandparents, our great-grandparents experienced it. And I do think that it was passed down generation to generation, right? In terms of how we actually healed from slavery, right? That we're almost not allowed to talk about it, but we never actually healed from it, right? Just even if you experience one traumatic event that you probably go to therapy for, but considering hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of undealt with racial trauma, that it's going to impact the way we see ourselves, our health, our just relationships. It sneaks in at conscious and unconscious levels that I think impacts us on a daily level, just in terms of our choices that we make to almost cope with some of the racial trauma.
And you know what, to your point, it's like when we look at our parents and our grandparents, I mean, we go back as far as our great-grandparents, that's a whole different, I wouldn't even understand how to process that. You know, when we look at the turn of the century, like the Victorian era, post-slavery. But when I look at people who are alive today. So let's just take people who are in their 70s, who are actually during Jim Crow. So let's go back to Jim Crow. Jim Crow era, I'm from New York, I'm from Harlem, but I live in Los Angeles now. And I cannot be in the neighborhood I'm in now after sundown. And these people who enforce these laws, during Jim Crow, I couldn't be on Sunset. I would have to be away. There was even, Paul Revere Williams was one of the first really, really big Black architects. He built the Beverly Hills Hotel, Bing Crosby's place, one of Frank Sinatra's apartments, but he had to be gone off the property, even though he's the architect, before sundown. And the thing is, when you look at who used to enforce these laws, these people are still alive today. These people are still in the Senate. These people still have grandkids who they see on Zooms. These people are my neighbors, your neighbors. We still have a whole community with these people, and who perpetuated these atrocious things to civil rights. And then also the people who had to ingest all of that trauma. And our grandparents who are still alive today who haven't left us yet. So when we think about that veil, it's not necessarily, in another time, it's still, the residue still exists today. So like you said about, the residue of, being passed down intergenerational, how do we say, not me, not now? And so I think that's the biggest thing or takeaway for myself as I'm trying to discover what it looks like to realize, no, this stops with me. What would you say there?
Ooh, I just even want to acknowledge the stress and of what you just said, even in your own neighborhood today, that's just, okay. Just acknowledge not feeling safe, and even you being perceived then as a threat, right? And how flip that is because they're threatening to you. It makes me think a lot about the work of Dr. Joy DeGruy. Dr. Joy DeGruy has a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And so she basically says that a lot of us in the United States, whether white or Black, could have this post-traumatic slave syndrome where we are not able to address the racial trauma and impacts of slavery on our lives today. Just in terms of the fears, right, that happen on a daily basis, of being pulled over by the police or, being followed around in the store by the wrong person or, these different things. But really recognizing that there's sort of some ever-present anger because it really made me mad that you're still experiencing this in even the status that you have, right? Just because of your profession doesn't mean that you are immune to racism. And so then it just makes me think about just the vacant self-esteem that can develop, where we value ourselves on things that aren't actually that important.
Yes.
That society might push us on. So I think one of the major ways to deal with this is therapy. Of course, I'm going to push therapy, right?
Normalize that. Normalize that. Please normalize that.
Yeah, right. We go to the dentist, we get our hair done, we go to the doctor, but right, we really need to address our emotional health, and to even define mental health being a state of well-being that includes emotional, psychological well-being, where we can function in society, we can be in relationships, we can work hard in our jobs, and even address our community needs. I think that that's a more expansive concept of mental health. It's not just about diseases or diagnoses, but really thinking about how to cope with the stress. So therapy, I love, right? Therapy. I'm a therapist.
Yes.
It really allows for us to tell our stories. I think that that's one of the major ways that we deal with stress, and even race-related stress, is to be able to create race narratives about it and really look at how the system of racism impacts us, and say, they basically being able to externalize that that's society versus that's not me.
Yes, yes.
And so individual therapy, but even group therapy, because it's shocking that so many of the clients that I work with who are people of color are going through the same things.
Yes, yes.
And so that makes me think, like, it's not on the individual level. There are systematic things that are happening that makes people feel this way.
Yeah.
And so one of the group therapy options that I highly recommend is something called emotional emancipation circles.
Wow. Okay.
So emotional emancipation circles. It's actually run by the Association of Black Psychologists.
Okay.
And so in each city, sometimes in barbershops and hair salons, there are these groups that are happening where people are really trying to come up with clear statements about how to defy the lie of Black inferiority. Like,
come on, slow it down. Go back. Rewind it. Flip it again. Tell me that again. What is that now? What is that? What was that?
Okay, so emotional emancipation circles are all about how to defy the lie of Black inferiority, right? So just to really be clear that there are circumstances that are lying to us, making it think like that it's us versus the system in which we developed and grew up in. And so just to think about how hearing other people's stories sometimes can help you cope, problem solve, reflect, because I don't think that we heal in isolation. We don't. We do not heal in isolation. And so to recognize that actually coping and learning how other people are coping can be very important for mental health.
Wow, that touched me. Okay, so I have some questions from the audience. I don't want to. Yeah, we got to jump right into this. But what you said just now was such an eye opener, and aha moment for me. Collective, you don't heal in isolation. Don't heal in isolation. So, question from the audience: how can educators cope with racism and bias when it appears so much in education spaces?
All right. I think that some of the buzz language over the past year is very important, right? How to be an anti-racist.
Yeah.
Kendi, I think he gave a lot of good examples in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, on how to confront the lies too, right? I'm going back to that theme of lies that happen. And I think being an anti-racist teacher or educator is similar to addressing microaggressions, to label when it's happening, to recognize the signs and symptoms of racism, and to be able to have a conversation. I think sometimes people are afraid to talk about racism, but we actually need to study it more and understand how it works, whether it's gender related or class related, because racism can have different looks or appearances depending on the context. So I think in educational context, there's definitely a thought that Black children come from a deficit, right? That maybe not as intelligent or not as hardworking. Which is clearly a lie. Black people value education probably the most. You know, Black women are the group getting the most degrees. And so recognize that the educational system is biased and perpetuates lies, whether it's gifted programs or who gets put in special ed, the tests, even bias who gets what placement. So I think that it's important to study the educational system and like label the different ways that it happens so that you can be aware and confront it in that way.
And then also to that point about the educational system, I mean, and then in 2020, there's so much, this is the information age we're in. And so we're learning that those books that were written have such a marginal view of history. And it's his story often, you know, and if we look at, you know, our children don't see themselves. That's why representation matters. I always talk about representation. It matters because, you know, young Black and brown children need to see themselves, you know, and not just as slaves. We go back as far as antiquity. So, but we're only learning about this small period that we were, you know, we were imprisoned. Really, you know, we weren't enslaved; we were enslaved. You know. So, but I'm gonna let that go and I keep on going to the next.
No, but I like that. Can I just refer to one other concept by Dr. Wade Nobles called scientific colonialism? Yes. Basically, this is political control of knowledge, because if we, you know, started with Mama Denkanesh, who was the oldest person in the world being in Africa, then we would have to tell a different story about Black people, right? In terms of starting it all versus being servant. So just to even recognize the control of knowledge is a big part of perpetuating.
Yes, and as an educator, when you're in that space and you know that this is I don't want to say you happen to see that you're perpetuating some of that, you know. So that would vex me to a certain extent internally, because I would want to give the kids all of the knowledge, you know, and not just a portion of it. So the next question is, how do you speak up when you don't have any support in the workplace? And so for me, I always talk to, you know, to so many people and like, you know, boards or whatever that looks like. And I always say, when you're a woman and you know, don't feel safe going to your car, if you feel like someone follows you, you know, a block and you come to the office, people will rally around you. You'll feel the support. You'll have the support. But when you're Black, it's your Blackness, and you say, hey, listen, I didn't feel safe when someone made a really aggressive comment about a complexion or this or that, or a disparaging remark. It's seen as imagination. It's seen, you know, it's gaslit. So how do you speak up in those spaces and identify, hey, this isn't okay, and what should you do from there?
That's hard, right? Because there can be consequences. You could lose your job. And especially in this economic system, it's hard to be unemployed during this time in the history, right? Yeah. People are almost compromising themselves because of the fears of unemployment. But I think that to recognize community, right? And to recognize that it exists outside of your job, who can really voice the struggles that you're going through, and how do you connect to them? Whether it is an attorney or it is, you know, a church group or someone else who can really join you, because I think that's how racism can sort of work sometimes, that it isolates us.
Yes,
and
yes.
to recognize that we have a whole continent to reach out to and connect with, and thinking about what other spaces. Now, there might be sacrifices that have to be made in a space that doesn't affirm you, and maybe that's also a sign to look for other employment if the very nature of the work is insulting and demeaning. It's hard. That's a hard one.
Yeah. I want to lean into what you just said about if when you experience these things, it is isolating. So, like, for example, when we look at any type of when we look at gay rights, when we look at animal rights, you know, not so much animal rights, but women's rights, we can personally understand in those spaces what that feels like, you know, for us or for those people. But when it is isolating, it is a box, it is a small space that you have to withdraw into to figure out how to process. So what does that look like in terms of that isolation that we possibly may experience? Can you, because I feel like when we can identify it, we can understand that it's happening and it's not our imagination. So can you help me out here?
Yeah, I think just even that, the culture of silencing, going back to that concept that if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, that means that the environment that you're in is set up in a way that you can be attacked. Yes. Right? That it's not a space to have conversation and lean into topics, to have difficult conversations even. And so it's depressing. It is so depressing to really think about you don't have anyone, or that. Yeah, this could cause lost sleep, changes in appetite, all of that when you're feeling like you have no other choice. But I think that that's part of the therapeutic work, to recognize that you do have options. Now your life might look very differently from what you're used to, but how do you keep your dignity?
Yes.
And at what cost are you willing to sacrifice your worth for a job? So.
And you know what? One thing is, Dr. Afia, I feel that for so many of us, one of the first things it does is it chips away at your confidence. It chips away at your ability to understand your worth and your value. And especially as we look at, Black creatives, as we look at people, because this is our Black beauty roster. And so I look at so many creatives who are starting out, who were like, hey, listen, I have just a running head shot to get an agent, to get these things. It's all of my counterparts. But the business says, do you really? And so, a lot of the times. And even to myself, even at this point in the game, to be honest, seriously, I experience, a lot of this stuff. But for me, it gives me wings. Like it's the reason I get out of bed in the morning, because it's like, oh no, this is not going to happen, because I know I can deal with it. I know I can, fight that fight. But as for so many people, it's like the bow and I walk away, because I don't feel because I have bills, because my kids, because I have other stressors. Like you said a minute ago, there are many pandemics. So many people are out of work. So many people are experiencing so many things, and then insert this pandemic, which is structural racism, and then it can be jarring. So for my thing is, if anyone's watching as a young Black creative, is don't let it fuck with your confidence. Like like don't let it not. Make sure you still post for that job, still reach for that goal, still, because it can chip away at what we feel like we can attain. Do you feel so?
I agree. And I think one of the ways that we can actually build our confidence as Black people is studying history. I love to study history because it's like, do you know where we came from? Like, yes. Oftentimes we think that, our enslaved African ancestors were brought here out of weakness. It was actually brought because we were actually brought here because of our strengths in beauty and agriculture and science and math and education, that we created so many things. And looking back they're still trying to figure out, about pyramids and all of that, like to really understand our full story, I think actually makes me feel more confident. When I wear certain textiles, I'm like, I don't even know how this was made, but it makes me feel more beautiful and confident. So just thinking about how to adorn ourselves, the adornment piece, and recognizing that we have a wealth, beauty and culture. Right. And so a big way for us to really find a true sense of identity and confidence.
And you know what? Speaking to what you're saying, and look no further than any trend that is popular around the world. When we look at Black culture, we move the needle. We're so copied and imitated. Like when it comes to our features, when it comes to the way we style, how we do what we put on, completely transforms a trend or something that is sartorial, and we give it flavor. So knowing that. So I walk confidently through through these neighborhoods that don't want to see me here, or through these places and offices that don't really want to see a Black man. But I know inside you have something that if you don't appreciate it, I guarantee your teenage daughter or son wants to emulate. So just knowing as a young Black creative to continue to push, even you don't need to have the green lights or the code signature from the universe or from corporate America or from white America to continue to do your thing. And so I want to say one of the last questions I have, it's from the audience, is what's the connection between your clinical psychology expertise and doing hair? So is there any correlation that you find?
Yes, absolutely. So, I made up a new word called psychotherapy, which
psychotherapy. I like that. Tell me about it.
It's using hair as an entry point into mental health services. And so one of my tasks with psychotherapy is training the beauty industry, especially makeup artists, hair care professionals, basic counseling techniques. So understanding mental health first aid. What do you do or say when someone has a panic attack? What do you do or say when someone experiences a loss in their family? And using hair and beauty as a way to have conversations about who someone is and how they cope with stress. So a big part is really arming the community with the skills to process, be active listeners, problem solve within these contexts. So yeah, psychotherapy.
Okay, so speaking about psychotherapy and staying on the subject of what you're talking about, and this is also in the book Textures that you have behind you. I'll let the guys. It's a link in every bio. It should be here everywhere. But guys, so the question I have for you is, when we look at something as healing as we do as hair or makeup or styling, we're giving our gifts to the world in that way. Is that therapeutic? Is that therapy? What's the correlation between mental health and hair or makeup or beauty? How we see ourselves?
Yeah, well, I think that our hair and beauty and style are a language, a sophisticated language of how we express our identity, our age, our wealth, where we're from, all of that can speak. And so sometimes our stories can be fractured and are expressed, and or even when we're feeling very depressed or stressed, that our hair will change, our skin will change. And so recognizing the things that we need to do to take care of our mental health are actually the same things we need to do to take care of our skin and our hair, right? Drinking enough water, getting enough rest, exercising, eating nutrient-dense diets, all of that speaks to stress management and beauty. So the same things that takes care of our mental health and resting and all of that takes care of our hair and our skin. So there's a deep correlation, right?
Wow. What's one, if you had to, what would you like to leave on the audience of everyone listening today? Why would you want to close this out in the next few minutes? I'm curious.
Yeah. As people who take care of others, we really, really need to take care of ourselves. Like having scheduled time, whether it's with a therapist or just each morning having quiet time, we are being attacked on so many different levels, whether it's racism, sexism, or even just violence in other ways, that we have to counteract that stress by investing in our health. We have to invest in our health and wellness.
And when you say invest, what if, I look at so many creatives and it's tough, it's tough for a lot of creatives right now. So when you say invest, how am I investing in my mental health?
Investing, that can mean waking up every morning and journaling your thoughts, right? Starting your day rather than picking up your phone and see what's trending, actually having quiet time. It's free to journal, right? And just maybe it means you have to wake up a little bit earlier, but starting your day with affirmations, really thinking about what is your goal or agenda for the day rather than letting other people set it.
That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah. So really, communing with spiritual work, however you interpret that to be, whatever energizes you, make sure you get that energy. And really reaching out to people who make you feel good, whether it's family or friends, to send a text or to have a quick phone call or silence. I know I recharge from isolation, even though this is a lot of isolation going on, but I recharge from isolation and to think about what I can do in those quiet moments, even if it's 5 minutes of breathing deeply, to be able to reset my energy and my wellness.
Breathing is really important. I learned that, breathing, even like if you take 5 serious deep breaths in from your diaphragm, not from your nose, not shallow breaths, it literally changes your whole sense of well-being in that moment. It moves the needle. For some reason, it's like a reset button. And I've learned that. So breathing is really, really key. I hope that everyone feels empowered on a daily basis. Like you said, there's so many pandemics, right? There are multiple pandemics. How would you name them?
Gosh, well, yeah, of course, COVID, racism, right? In terms of really thinking about how it is a virus that has spread around the world, just the same. Sexism, and just even thinking about how women are treated, both in terms of being objectified and, maybe even how they treat each other, and demeaning experiences or sexual violence that happens on a daily basis, and trafficking and all of these things. Now it's like traumatizing to think about it, but I know that those are the ones that particularly impact my life. Especially the clients that I work with. So I hear the stories of trauma related to those topics and loss that we're experiencing, right?
Yeah. So guys, I hope you know and love and see why I really appreciate and so honored for that Dr. Afia took the Sunday morning to give us a moment and a word, okay? And I hope someone can get an amen out of this, because I feel a collective nod, and I'm exhaling right now, listening and talking to you. Her books are called Strong Black Girls, was the first, and then the most recent book is called Textures. And so guys, you have to take a look at these books and just continue to hold space and with each other and community. Community is key. So Dr. Afia, thank you so much for coming out. All right. So guys, I'll talk to you guys later. I am going to be taking questions on the masterclass portion of it all in a few minutes, or I want to say about an hour. So much love to you. Stay up, keep your chin up. That kind of thing.
All right.
Bye, Dr. Via.
Bye.